You're kneeling at the mouth of a limestone cave in what is now South Africa, nearly a million years before anyone on Earth owns a single pot. Ash sits banked in a shallow pit in front of you, gray and fine, mixed with the burned bones of last night's meal. There's no clay vessel here, no metal, nothing that could sit directly on flame without cracking apart. Just fire, meat, and bare hands. The smell is smoke and scorched fat, not steam. And somehow, this is still cooking, real cooking, hundreds of thousands of years before the tool everyone assumes made it possible. Right now, you reach for a pot with a handle, fill it at a tap, and set it on a stove with a dial that does the thinking for you. 20 minutes later, dinner is ready, and you never once touch the fire directly. Delete the container from that picture entirely, and cooking doesn't stop. It just gets a lot more inventive and a lot more physical. So, how did humans cook with fire for hundreds of thousands of years before anyone had something that could hold water over a flame without burning straight through? Start with the cave itself. In 2012, archaeologist Francesco Berna and his team, studying Wonderwork Cave in South Africa, published evidence of ash and burned bone fragments buried nearly a million years deep in the site's sediment layers. A million years. That's roughly 980,000 years before the earliest known pottery shows up anywhere on the planet. The ash wasn't scattered by a wildfire wandering in from outside. Wildfire ash looks different under a microscope, scattered and inconsistent. This ash was contained, repeated, built up in the same spot over and over, layer stacked on layer. Translation: this wasn't an accident. Someone was tending it night after night, long before anyone would call that person human by the modern definition. Everyone assumes cooking arrived with the container. It didn't. Fire came roughly a million years before the pot did, which means for over 95% of the time humans have cooked food, there was no pot anywhere in the process. So if there's no pot, how do you actually turn raw food into something worth eating? The simplest answer is also the oldest. 1. You don't put food in anything, you put it directly on or beside the coals. At Kesem Cave in Israel, geoarchaeologist Ruth Shahak Gross and her team published findings in 2014, describing a hearth reused again and again in the exact same spot, 4 square meters wide, heated past 500 degrees Celsius, dated to roughly 300,000 years ago. Flint tools built specifically for cutting meat turned up scattered right around it, while different tools clustered a few meters away for other tasks entirely. 300,000 years, one hearth, one location. Organized like a home. That's not a campfire. That's a kitchen. Meat wasn't the only thing on the menu, and it may not even have been the main one. In Border Cave, tucked into the Labombo Mountains of South Africa, researcher Lynn Wadley and her team identified 55 charred rhizomes from a plant called hypoxis, dated to as far back as 170,000 years ago. Raw, these roots are tough, fibrous, and barely worth the effort of chewing. Cooked, they soften into something closer to 500 kilojoules of usable energy per 100 grams, a real staple food, not a desperate snack. Someone dug them up with a wooden digging stick, carried them back to camp, and cooked them in a shared fire. That's 170,000 years before a single ceramic vessel existed anywhere to hold them. Everyone pictures early humans gnawing raw meat off a bone, hunched and shivering. Actually, some of the oldest cooked meals on record aren't meat at all. They're vegetables, shared around a fire like a meal. Not just fuel. But roasting only gets you so far. What happens when the food actually needs water? This is where the trick gets clever. Archaeologist Alston Thoms spent years, starting around 2008, documenting a method called hot rock cookery, still practiced by hunter-gatherer communities well into the 20th century. Ethnographic accounts describe Kalispel elders in the Pacific Northwest, interviewed in the 1930s, explaining how it worked. Heat stones directly in the fire, then drop them into a pit lined with hide, or a tightly woven bag filled with water. The stones carry heat the flame itself never touches. Toms traced the technique's roots in the Old World back roughly 30,000 years, and found it reappearing independently in the Americas by around 10,000 years ago. No fireproof pot required, just rocks, water, and patience. Everyone assumes boiling requires a container that can survive direct flame. It doesn't. It requires one very hot rock and something as ordinary as a hide bag. And it wasn't only modern humans doing this. In 2011, biological anthropologist Amanda Henry examined dental calculus scraped from Neanderthal teeth found at Shanidar Cave in Iraq. 3 teeth alone carried 73 separate starch grains, and 15 of them showed the exact structural damage that only happens when starch is cooked, not eaten raw. Those teeth date to roughly 40,000 years old, tens of thousands of years before pottery existed anywhere nearby. A completely different human species, on a completely different branch of the family tree, quietly cooking its own vegetables. Everyone assumes Neanderthals were pure carnivores, built for chasing mammoths and little else. The plaque on their own teeth says otherwise. So what does all of that actually add up to? The real answer was never a single invention. It was 3, stacked on top of each other. Fire that holds still in one spot, rock that carries heat where flame can't reach, and a pit or a hide bag that turns the landscape itself into a container. Harvard primatologist Richard Wrangham argued in 2009 that this mattered more than almost anything else in human evolution, because cooked food delivers dramatically more usable energy per bite than raw food ever can. That matters enormously, given that the human brain alone burns through roughly 20% of the body's resting energy, despite being about 2% of its weight. Somewhere between roasting meat over embers and boiling roots in a hide bag, humans found a way to feed something that expensive, long before anyone had a word for nutrition. The pot, when it finally showed up around 20,000 years ago, in a cave in Jiangxi, China, wasn't the breakthrough everyone assumes it was. It was a container finally catching up to a method that had already worked for nearly a million years. Go back to that cave mouth in South Africa, almost a million years deep in the sediment. No pot, no metal, just ash banked in the same spot, night after night by someone who understood something. Cooking was never really about the container. It was about control, of fire, of heat, of the raw material of survival itself. Long before anyone had something to hold it in. You still cook with that same instinct, even with a stove and a dial doing most of the work now. The pot didn't invent cooking. Cooking invented the pot.